Welcome back. Let's jump right into today's explainer. We are tracking an absolute crucible of history, India's intense 60-year struggle for independence. Think about it. This is the story of how a massive, incredibly diverse subcontinent, which was ruled by literally the most powerful empire on Earth at the time, managed to forge its own destiny. We're going to break down the exact mechanisms, the massive grassroots movements, and the truly tragic human costs of this historic shift.
To kick things off, I want to hook you immediately with this stark quote from Mahatma Gandhi. "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." Now, the context here is what makes this so incredibly powerful. He wasn't holding a gun, he wasn't holding a bomb, he was holding a handful of mud and salt that he just scooped up from the Gujarat coast. It's just a brilliant illustration of how a single, entirely peaceful act fundamentally challenged global imperial power.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the seeds of self-rule, then move into a darker era of mass action and massacre. From there, we'll cover SALT, Satyagraha, and struggle, then examine the incredibly complex World War II era, and finally wrap up with the bittersweet dawn of independence and partition.
All right, let's get into part 1, the seeds of self-rule, from petitions to protests.
We've got to wind the clock back to the late 19th century. This is really when a growing Indian consciousness first began to formally organize. Starting in 1885, the Indian National Congress was founded. Initially, it was just a forum for Indian intellectuals to voice their views to the British, starting out with only 73 delegates. But fast forward to 1905 and, well, everything changes. The British proposed partitioning Bengal, which a lot of Indians saw straight through as a deliberate divide-and-rule tactic. And the backlash? It sparked a massive, widespread public uprising. The resistance was so fierce and so sustained that by 1912, the British were actually forced to back down and withdraw the original partition plan.
So how exactly did they resist? Well, the 1905 partition triggered what became known as the Swadeshi movement. The strategy was super clear. Refuse to buy British imported goods, purchase only Indian-made products, and even burn foreign goods in public bonfires. I want you to really consider the strategic genius of mass economic non-cooperation here. They knew perfectly well that trade was the absolute lifeblood of the British Raj.
And the result of this early economic warfare? Staggering. There was a 25% drop in British imports by 1908. By simply refusing to participate in the colonial economy, the Indian masses proved they could hit the empire where it hurt the most, right in their wallets.
Moving right along to Section 2, Mass Action and Massacre. The movement hardens. Following World War I, a lot of Indians really hoped that their immense contributions to the war effort would finally result in democratic reforms. Instead, those hopes were tragically shattered.
Returning to India in 1915, Mahatma Gandhi brought back a revolutionary philosophy he had developed while in South Africa, Satyagraha. It's a nonviolent resistance tactic that strictly prohibits violence but demands total, uncompromising non-cooperation with oppressive policies. Gandhi's core belief was that by maintaining the moral high ground, treating opponents with a sort of resilient gentleness, the resistance could fundamentally expose the sheer injustice of colonial rule to the whole world.
But unfortunately, that moral high ground met with devastating, brutal force. This brings us to a very stark historical reality: the Amritsar Massacre on April 13, 1919. In response to growing protests against harsh new British laws, a large unarmed crowd gathered in Amritsar. British General Dyer, intending to completely suppress the protest, ordered his troops to open fire on the trapped crowd without any warning whatsoever.
The official British death toll from that terrible day stands at 379. It's a grim number that really grounds us in the horrific reality of the event, though, as we know, actual numbers were likely much, much higher. The main takeaway here is that Amritsar was a point of no return. It irreparably broke whatever remaining trust Indians had in British rule, shifting the momentum decisively and permanently in favor of full independence.
Which brings us to Section 3, SALT, Satyagraha, and struggle, striking the economy. By the 1930s, the global Great Depression had severely impacted India, but the British responded not with economic relief, but with oppressive new taxes, creating an absolute perfect storm for mass defiance.
Just look at the clear progression of the famous 1930s Salt March. Step 1. The British impose an absolutely absurd tax requiring Indians to pay exorbitant fees for salt, completely prohibiting them from extracting it themselves. Step 2.
Gandhi leads a peaceful 240-mile walk to the coast to defy this law. Step 3, he simply scoops up mud and salt just like we talked about at the beginning, and millions of Indians follow his lead, boiling seawater to make their own salt. The brilliant simplicity of defying attacks on a basic human necessity, it completely united the country.
To wrap your head around the sheer scale of this resistance, consider this number: 60,000. That's how many people were arrested by the British in the aftermath of the march. This staggering figure solidifies just how unstoppable the movement's momentum had become. I mean, you can't exactly arrest an entire subcontinent.
On to Section 4, World War II and Resistance, Diverging Paths to Freedom. When the Second World War broke out, India's political situation grew incredibly complex. On one hand, you had 1.4 million Indians fighting valiantly for the Allies across the globe. But back home, domestic political leadership actually fractured over the best strategy to achieve immediate freedom.
This created a massive, fascinating ideological split. On one side, Mahatma Gandhi launched the 1942 Quit India movement. He was demanding immediate independence through peaceful mass non-cooperation, which actually led to the arrest of the entire Congress leadership. But on the other side, you had Subhas Chandra Bose. He believed that the enemy of his enemy was his friend. So Bose formed the Indian National Army and actively allied with Axis powers, seeking to launch an armed invasion of India to force the British out. This stark contrast just goes to show how deep the desperation for independence ran, leading leaders down vastly different paths.
And then, amidst all this wartime chaos, India suffered an unimaginable tragedy: the 1943 Bengal Famine. With Japanese forces controlling nearby Burma and cutting off vital food imports, severe shortages hit Bengal hard. The historical debate here is fierce. Some point to the British government's severe lack of intervention and colonial negligence, while others point to the impossible constraints of wartime supply prioritization. But regardless of the cause, the facts are devastating. An estimated 1 million people starved to death. The human toll remains an undeniable, absolute horror of the era.
We finally arrive at our fifth and final section, Independence and Partition, a bittersweet dawn. Following the end of World War II, a completely financially and politically exhausted Britain finally concedes what the Indian people had been demanding for decades. They must withdraw from the subcontinent.
But look at how severely rushed this timeline was. It's wild. In June 1947, a partition outline is finally agreed upon, deciding to carve the subcontinent into a Hindu-majority India and a Muslim-majority Pakistan. Just 2 months later, on August 14th, Pakistan declares independence. The very next day, August 15th, India declares independence. The actual borders weren't even formally announced until right at the transition of power.
To really grasp the shock of this sudden societal upheaval, check out this demographic data. In Pakistani-controlled Punjab, Hindus and Sikhs made up 22% of the population in 1931. By 1951, because of the newly drawn borders and massive forced migrations, that number absolutely plummeted to just 0.16%. And similar sweeping demographic shifts happened in reverse over on the Indian side of the border.
And the human cost of that upheaval? Heartbreaking. An estimated 1 million lives were lost, as millions of people desperately migrated across the newly drawn borders, trying to reach their respective religious majorities. Horrifying communal violence erupted between Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. It was a staggering bloodbath that cast a very dark shadow over the joy of newfound freedom.
And that darkness deepened just months later. On January 30, 1948, Mahatma Gandhi, the man who had spent his entire life advocating for nonviolence and was working tirelessly to heal the Hindu-Muslim divide, was assassinated by a radical who felt he had betrayed Hindus. Announcing his death, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru famously stated, "The light has gone out of our lives." It was a massive, heartbreaking final blow to the founding generation. Yet somehow, out of all that tragedy, a resilient new nation was built. The new Indian Republic codified its democratic ideals, and the Constitution officially came into force on January 26, 1950. It boldly guaranteed universal voting rights for all citizens above 21, established legal protections for freedom of speech and religion, and saw Jawaharlal Nehru elected as the first prime minister. After 60 years of intense struggle, India was finally governed by its own people.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. How does a new democracy forge a unified future out of the fires of such a deeply partitioned history?
This 60-year struggle for independence entirely shaped the modern subcontinent. It left a legacy of profound democratic resilience for sure, but also deep, lingering divisions. I hope this explainer helped clarify exactly how this monumental shift happened. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and keep asking great questions.